The enemy attack at their peril.
Hi everyone and welcome to another painting tutorial from Promethean Paints. Today we're going to be focusing on Ferren Areios, not quite sure how you pronounce his surname, but he's a new Ultramarines character from this Black Library collection. So I'll be painting him in standard Ultramarines blue with a little extra fiery thunder hammer for some just special effects on him. So I've gone ahead and primed the miniature in just a standard black primer from Vallejo, but you can use any black primer, Chaos Black, anything really. And then grabbing the airbrush, putting some Vallejo White Ink into it, no dilution needed, just straight out of the airbrush. We're adding some gradients to the armour using pure white, because over the top of this we'll be using some contrast paint to create the blue armour. So as you can see here, there's no special tricks. I'm using a relatively cheap airbrush. It's about £20 the airbrush cost, and the ink's coming straight out of it with no dilution, and I'm just focusing on the areas that I want to be bright, giving them a couple of sprays, leaving some areas with some natural gradient and almost black into some of those deepest shadows. So where I want the armour to be brightest is where we have the brightest white, and then just leaving some dark areas where we would have those natural shadows. This is a tabletop piece, so I'm not having a particular sunlight coming from one direction, but I always imagine the light coming from the sort of top left diagonally down, so it's sort of thunder hammer arm is where the light is coming from, and then the light goes across there. So where you've got light across the top of the arm, you would have shadow underneath it. Light at the top of the leg, have shadows in those deeper corners. Okay, give that a few minutes to dry. Go and wash out your airbrush, and then grab the Citadel Contrast Frostheart. A couple of drops of this into your airbrush. You don't need very much if you're just doing one model. If you're doing an army, then you'd put a few extra drops in there, and just spray over all of the model in this blue. This is a contrast paint, so it is quite thin, so take care when pushing it through the airbrush. Much with the ink, just do a few sprays. When that contrast starts to sort of shine and glisten on the model, that shows that it's pretty wet, so just move away, spray another area. It takes about 2 or 3 coats to get a nice deep blue coverage. Don't worry if you go over any of the other areas, we'll be over painting those a bit later and bring it all back to a standard base coat. And then what we can do next is we're going to grab another Citadel contrast, which is the Tallasar blue, a darker blue, almost like an ultramarine blue, but I find it a bit too dark straight over. That's why we've gone for this lighter blue. But what I use the Tallasar blue is in enhancing those shadows. So where we've got those darkest parts, just a couple of sprays very carefully into those deepest shadows, so we get a nice transition from your brightest blue down to your darkest blue. So where those dark patches are, just a couple of sprays. There's a little bit of overspray there which helps blend it all in. With a few sprays you'll get a nice, instead of black, you'll have a very, very dark blue with a nice transition into your light blue. Right, once it's all dry, this next stage is optional. You could use this AK panel liner, or you could use Nuln Oil, or you could make your own panel liner oil wash. But I find this is great to use because it's got its own little fine brush, couple of shakes. It's an oil based, so it goes on really easily. And all I'm doing here, just carefully, just going in and filling in all of the panel lines, so any recesses on the armour, just filling in with this black ink. You could do this stage before you've applied your blue over the top, so do the white ink and then do this black and then go over it with the blue. It doesn't matter really for me, I do it either way. For this model I've just done it a bit later on in the stage to show the different ways you can do it. We also go around and pick out some of the other details. It's really on just sort of recess shading with this black across all of anything that's touching the armour. This stuff's really good. The contrast paint adds a sort of shine to the model, and what it means is this oil based panel liner will then naturally just and quickly evenly flow into those gaps with just a couple of touches of the brush. You'll find it just pulls it straight into those little recesses. Unlike Nuln Oil or a water based, when you're doing this you've got to kind of push and pull the paint all over the place, whereas this, a couple of little dabs and you'll find the paint just will flow into those recesses with no troubles. If you get any paint over the armour, just use your finger or an old brush or a bit of cloth and just wipe that paint off. It comes off very easily. As it's oil based, it takes 10-15 minutes to dry. Right, once that's done, a couple of things. I've then gone over, and anything that isn't the blue armour, I've base coated in AK Tenebrous Grey, which is a very, very dark grey-black colour. You could just go black, but this Tenebrous Grey is just I just like this colour. Not all shadows are black, there are lots of different colours. So, we're now going to work on some non-metallic gold. So, for the non-metallic gold, we obviously got dark browns up to ochres to yellows to sort of almost white. So my darkest colour really is, even though we do some washes over the top of this a little bit later on, I'm starting off with Beast Brown, which is a bit like Mornfang Brown. If you're using the Citadel range, Mornfang Brown's a bit more red, this is a bit darker brown. But just base coat all of the areas you want to be gold in this Beast Brown. Nothing really clever, this is just your first base coat. Once we've done that, the next colour we're going to be moving to is Japanese brown, which is a nice dark ochre colour, and we're just going to do a 50-50 mix of the Japanese brown and the beast brown. So this will give us a sort of transition from our darkest colour to our sort of first stage of highlight, start getting that gold type colouring into it. Now, I don't profess to be a non-metallic metal expert. I actually followed the box art to what Games Workshop painted the model, where they applied some of these highlights, but following on the principle of how the armour is highlighted, that's where I wanted to follow the sort of highlights for these. So I'm pretty much covering, I would say, about 80% of the beast brown in this next colour, this 50-50 mix. Making sure you edge highlight everything, always do an edge highlight, and then where you're covering large areas to get a sort of transition, you'll notice that I do little scratches and marks, and then do a thick line of paint over the top. So the highlights can be positioned wherever you like, but just make sure they follow some of the rules with sort of your metallics. You don't want massive highlights in areas where you've got shadows. You want to follow your same principles of where you're applying other highlights to apply those highlights, and practice makes perfect. If you get it wrong, you can just go over it again and start from scratch. Some areas you can almost dry brush it on some of those other areas, like the those sort of weird metallic sort of capsules where he's keeping his parchments around. It's almost dry brushed on in those areas, and just pick out the details as you go through. Okay, so the next stage, I guess what we would sort of start to call our mid-tones, is now just going to be pure the Japanese uniform. So no mixing here. And now we start to pick out where we want the highlights. Again, do an edge highlight, but sort of edge highlight in a smaller area. So you're only edge highlighting about 60% of the trims, but ensure you edge highlight where you want your brightest points. And just go around picking out all those bits of detail. So you already know now at this point you've made a marker of where you want your highlights. So for instance, if we're just looking at these parts, this is the top of the laurels, it's the top of the shoulder pads, it's any point that's pointing directly up to the sunlight. So now you're improving those highlights by adding brighter and brighter colours to them and transitioning from what was that dark brown up to bright yellows. Always try and ensure as well that you have really good contrast between your darks and your lights. That's the true non-metallic principle of contrast between dark and light. If you have too many brights, then it doesn't make any sense, and too many darks, you can't tell what it is. And now, unlike some of the other NMM tutorials I've done, we're actually going to introduce a yellow. So this is AK Dirty Yellow, which is a bit, I'm not sure, Bad Moon Yellow, I think, from the Citadel range. And again, now we're really enhancing our highlights. As you can see, I'm not putting too much of this on, but this is where I'm edge highlighting and adding little lines and scratches to those bright point areas that I want. Just take your time. I'm using a size 0 brush. You could use a 00 brush. These brushes are they're the Kaninsky brushes from Raphael. It's the 8404 series. I used to use liner brushes as well. The Citadel range, the Artificer brushes are good. I find these Raphael brushes are really good. They put up a lot of work. We get a lot of painting out of one brush, and the O and size 1 brushes have really fine points for lots of fine detail. Just because the brush is small doesn't necessarily mean you can do very fine detail, because if the point doesn't go very sharp, then you can't get that fine detail, and I find these Raphael brushes are really good for fine detail. So yeah, just work around now enhancing your highlights with the Dirty Yellow. going to really push the highlight now using a fantastic colour, which is the AK Lemon Yellow. This is it's almost fluorescent. If I put the fluorescent yellow and lemon yellow next to each other, I mean, they're very, very close to each other. This isn't spot highlights, but it's almost close to it. Definitely edge highlighting, and this is really now enhancing your bright points. Try not to put too much onto the brush, little bits. If you splodge this on, it can look a little bit garish, so you just need to take a little bit of care and enhance those highlights that you've got, enhance those edge highlights, pick out some rivets if there are any. I apologise for coughing as well. Papa Nurgle has infected me over the last couple of weeks. I'm just getting over it now. Been away from the painting table for nearly 10 days, so this is my first time back on it for a little while. And apart from a little bit of white that we'll be adding a lot later, we're now using AK Ice Yellow, and this is almost treat this as white. So this is our brightest points now. Don't use a lot of this, just a little bit of edge highlighting. Pick out your bright points, remembering those little scratch marks, or yeah, little is definitely more when it comes to this colour. Okay, now we're just going to help with those transitions and add some, just back to some colour into our shadows. So I've made a wash there of that beast brown, so that's 1 drop of paint to probably 5 or 6 drops of water, and all I'm doing is running some of that wash into the shadows and pulling it across the sort of mid-tones that we had, so that it goes from the mid-tones into the darkest shadows. Try and stay away from your brightest highlights and just focus on those shadows. And then I do the same with the tenebrous grey. I then make a wash of tenebrous grey and add some of that into the deepest shadows and around any of the rivets as well that's on the emblem on the top of his backpack. Just before we get to the tenebrous grey, I use whole red, which is, I suppose, corn red or maybe even Rhinox hide. Make a wash of that. As you can see, 1 little drop of paint to a lot of drops of water, and just doing the same thing we've just done with the beast brown, but in smaller areas now. So just adding the wash of that paint into those recesses and into the darkest points, just to go from brightest to your darkest and add a little bit more colour and flavour to your gold. You can use other colours as well. You can use reds and greens and browns and yellows, in any colour if you want to do some bounce back highlights. So if you were surrounded by blue, you could put a little bit of blue or purple in there, but I didn't want to do any of that for Ferren. Just kept his armour nice and clean and tidy with standard highlights and shadows. After that tenebrous grey, I just wanted to just enhance some of those little highlights again, just where we're using that ice yellow, just to really make them pop. There we go, almost real time there. We're an hour in and we've done the armour. It took a little bit of time, but I was fine for the characters. That non-metallic metal is really nice, but for your standard miniatures you can just use your normal gold on those. So we're moving on to the leather now, and on the leather using 4 colours, which is AK Afro Shadow, AK Leather Brown, AK Saddle Brown and the Citadel Cadian Flesh Tone. And it's a relatively straightforward process. So base coat anything you want in leather in the Afro Shadow, which would be Rhinox hide, and then the leather brown is your sort of main colour. You're going to cover probably 90% in your leather brown. Then you do your initial highlight with the saddle brown, and that's where you can introduce your edge highlighting, your raised areas, scratches and any sort of texture you want to add. And then highlight highlight all of that with the sort of saddle brown, and then over the top of that with the Cadian Flesh Tone. Now the Cadian Flesh Tone is used to add the wear and tear to your leather, so an edge highlight in a sort of scratchy dotted manner, and then picking out any other edges with your Cadian flesh tone. And there's not actually too much on this model. I've gone for a more brown leather than a red leather. Obviously Ferren on the box art has that sort of reddish leather, but I've just gone for the sort of standard brown. I didn't want it too heavily worn as he's, new on the battlefield. Right, now we're doing sort of the ropes, tabard sort of bits, and for that we've got 3 colours, which is AK Violet Red, AK Magenta and AK Intense Pink. And these are the sort of ropes that hang around his chest, the handle for the Thunder Hammer and the wax purity seal as well. So you just go ahead and base coat all of them in the violet red. And much like the leather, then what we're really doing is picking out detail. So we pick out the detail using the magenta. Now with the magenta you can almost dry brush it over the rope parts to pick out the detail, or if you're confident with that, you'll find brushwork just to pick out those bits, the ribbed areas that they've put on. And then the intense pink is just used as a final edge highlight. Sparingly, don't use too much of it, just do it on those ultra raised areas where you want the light to be the brightest. Okay, so we're sort of moving on to sort of parchment now, and so there's 3 colours here, which is AK Mud Brown, AK Light Earth, and then some AK Ivory. This would sort of be your Steel Legion Drabs, Xandri Dust, Ushabti Bone sort of colours from Games Workshop. So you just base coat in your darkest sort of brown colour, and then do a scratchy base coating highlight with your mid-tone, and then the ivory is just used very sparingly as a small highlight across the parchment and across the sort of parchment part on his leg. But yeah, your standard brown mid-tones are used. Like I say, for GW you would use your Steel Legion Drab, and then maybe Xandri Dust and Ushabti Bone. These are very similar colours to how we paint the skulls as well. The sort of mud brown, light earth sort of tones are used to paint the skulls. Again, the Citadel would be your sort of Xandri Dust, Steel Legion Drabs, Ushabti Bones. Apply your base coat, and then much like how you would paint a face, pick out the eye sockets, scratches, divots, and the nose hole and the sort of teeth, and then just increase your highlights on those raised areas. Okay, so now we're going to be painting Ferren's face using just two colours, well three when we do a little wash in a minute. So first off, we're going to base coat with Doombull Brown. It's a little bit watered down, this Doombull Brown, so 2 or 3 layers. I often find watering down your paints isn't always necessary, but on faces I tend to, because there's a lot of fine detail on the face, and sometimes you can get some nice transitions going from a thin first coat up to 3 coats, so you get a natural gradient appearing from your darkest areas up to your brightest areas just by how many layers of your initial base coat you apply over your darker base coat and primer. So yeah, a couple of coats of the Doombull Brown, and then all we're going to be doing then is using the Citadel Flayed One Flesh as your transition colours. So we do a sort of 70-30 Doombull Brown to Flayed One, then a 50-50, then we start swinging the gradient more towards the Flayed One Flesh. We never go pure Flayed One Flesh, so we're only going up to maybe a sort of a 70-30 in favour of the Flayed One Flesh, painting the faces as we normally do by picking out any of the raised areas. So there you can see the first sort of mix, so sort of a 70-30, and then I'm just picking out the nose, the eyebrows, the tops of the cheeks, the tops of the mouth, the rough, the notches on his forehead. He's got a scar on his left hand side, so I'm picking that out, keeping those nice reddish brown undertones for his skin. And as you can see, I just was transitioning to more and more brighter, more Flayed One Flesh to get the overall effect. Right, now I'm going to just paint the Ultramarine symbol on his arm, and for that I use AK Blue Grey as a base coat, just sort of like your Alton Grey, and then do a sort of top coat over the top of that with white. So I haven't gone pure white straight away, just use that Blue Grey or Alton Grey as a nice sort of base coat, and then just go over any areas you want to be white with your white. I then grabbed some AK Wine Red. You could use Carabao Crimson or some Vulpus Pink, but whatever that reddish colour you use, make sure you heavily water it down to make a wash. And what I do here is I just went back to the face with that Wine Red or the Carabao Crimson or the Vulpus Pink put into a wash, and just added some of the colour into the cut on his eye and around his eyes and mouth area, just anywhere where the skin is going to be touching something it's not used to. Just enhances the look and feel of his head. I didn't at first do it because I didn't think it would work very well, but then I thought I'd give it a go, and yeah, it really does enhance the colour of his face. The wine, I use it on sort of Caucasian flesh, but I haven't ever used it on dark flesh before. And yeah, it actually worked better than I thought, especially because we've highlighted those areas. So yeah, a couple of little areas pick out with your Wine Red. As I was saying, if you use Carabao Crimson or Vulpus Pink, and like with the Wine Red, heavily water it down. Those are very strong paints, so they do need, it's probably 1 drop of paint to 8 drops of water. We're making good progress now. We're just going to move on to the Thunder Hammer. So for this, I'm just using some pure white. So this is the AK White Intense, but Skull White, whatever you use for your white paint. I find the AK Intense White is proving me well. So for the Thunder Hammer, we are going to be using the airbrush, but I want to just get some intense white down in some of the areas I want to be brightest. So I just pick out those points. So there's some vent holes, sort of insides of the Thunder Hammer, anywhere where I was imagining the heat coming from. So I do the sort of central points of the squares as well, the sort of squares of the hammer. I pick those out. I'm going to be going over those areas with the airbrush, but those would be the most intense glowing areas that we're going to be creating our effects with. as I mentioned, it's back to the airbrush. Using the Vallejo White Ink, and we do very carefully, just centralising the nozzle, the sort of needle, to where the points of white you've just done. A couple of little sprays, which then intensifies that white central point, but then gives a natural haloing effect around it, which will work really well with the fluorescent colours we're just about to put through. So the first fluorescent we're going to put through is from Green Stuff World, and it's the fluorescent orange yellow they've got. So not fluorescent orange, not fluorescent yellow, but fluorescent orange yellow. Make sure you get that one. We do use fluorescent orange on its own, but this mix they've done is really good. You can mix the two colours yourself, oranges and yellow fluorescents, but I've never got it to work as well as this. So I'm covering all of the white and the surrounding area, a little bit of the surrounding area, with that AK orange yellow, for AK, the Green Stuff World orange yellow fluorescent. And once that's dry, I then apply some Green Stuff World Fluorescent Red over the areas. I just take away some of the yellow. The fluorescent red now starts to intensify the heat effects of it. So I'm not 100% covering the whole thing. I'm covering probably a 60% opacity, leaving the orange there, but adding that red glowing effect. You'll understand when you start doing these yourself how this red colour works. It's bizarre how by darkening it down you're actually intensifying those central glowing points. It's a great colour, the Green Stuff World Fluorescent Red. Don't need too much of it. As you can see, we're getting a really good effect already just by adding a few sprays of this, especially into the shadow areas. I'm trying to leave those central points that we had as white, as glowing as they can. But yeah, a few sprays and our airbrush work is pretty much done there. So to finish off the effect, we grab the AK Tenebrous Grey. You could use Corvus Black for this. And what we're sort of going to do now is we want the edges of the Thunder Hammer to be cooler than the core. So like the lava effects we do, to do that was, it's darker. So something that's very, very bright is very, very hot. Something that's very, very dark is very, very cold. That's how we sort of do the fluorescent effects, the glowing effects. So all I do here is I'm edge highlighting all the edges of the Thunder Hammer, but I'm doing it in a haphazardy, scratchy, dotty kind of way, so it gives the effect of some crackling, cooled metal around the hammer itself. Almost dry brushing there, where we've got the Emperor's emblem, the eagle there. Pick out the little rivet points that are there, and then just some subtle edge highlighting, thicker in some places, a bit more narrower, add some scratches and some marks. And what this does is it helps sell the heat in the centre, because you're showing that the surrounding areas are glowing, which tricks the mind into the effect that we're trying to give. I wouldn't say less is more. You'll know as you're doing this, you'll reach a point where it'll look right. Certainly don't go over the top, otherwise it would look too cold, unless you wanted to go for a much cooler looking hammer. I went for a more glowing, subtle effect with the cooling in the corners. And I want to bring back some of the glow again, so I use a little bit of the intense white and add just little drops of this into the vent holes that are on sort of the shaft of the Thunder Hammer. And I also add a couple of little lines in the central points of the hammer itself, which I'm going to go over in Fluorescent Yellow. Just almost like if it was a lava flow, you'd have those very central hot points. So a couple of little sort of lightning marks with your brush. You can use a very small brush. Again, I'm using a size 0 brush there, just making it into a fine tip. And then I grab the AK Fluorescent Yellow and just go over the top of those bits of white in the Fluorescent Yellow. There we go. See on the camera, there's quite a few bright lights going onto it, so I'd sort of turn the lights down there and you can see a really nice glowing effect of the hammer. We're not doing any OSL onto his armour. I wanted to keep those effects to a minimum for this guy. Right, just using I'm using their AK Deep Red, any of your medium red tones like Mephiston Red, Evil Sun Scarlet, and I'm just painting the sort of V that's on his leg, the sort of chapter marking, and it's just, you do a straight line diagonally down, another straight line diagonally down, meeting, and then just thicken that line out. You can get these as transfers, but I thought it'd just be a bit easier just to paint it on. Sadly, a bit of the video we were doing got corrupt, which was doing some of the non-metallic metal, but for that we used a couple of grey tones. So we're sort of jumping ahead here, just doing some glowing green effects on his arm. He's got like a little green lens screen, and I did the skull, the server skull. I did that as green as well. So we use 3 colours for that. We use AK black green, AK deep green, and then a bit of white, and then AK fluorescent green. So that would be a sort of Caliban green, moot green, or warpstone green, and then up to a fluorescent. So base coat the areas in that dark green and the surrounding areas as well, and then the actual part that you want to be bright is just paint that as the deep green or your bright green colour. So the lens was the whole of the lens and surrounding area, like the frame, and then the bright green colour is the actual lens itself or the screen. Then with the white, just add a little bit of white, a little dot onto the eye, a few little scratches onto the lens that look like little markings. You see I sort of do a sort of edge highlight, very thin edge highlight there, and then there's some little dots, like there's some markings, and then a little dot of white on the lens eye, and then go over the whole thing with the AK fluorescent green, and you've got a very quick and easy green glowing effect. Now we're going to be going for our red glowing effects, the heat effects, and for that we use a handful of colours. So we use the wine red, the deep red, so for the fluorescent red and the fluorescent orange, and a little bit of white. The first step is to base coat, much like we did with the green. We're now just going to be base coating anything we want to have that red glowing effect, the heat effects that we have. Base coat those areas in the wine red. So I do the sort of U emblem on the skull's forehead, his other eye, I put in the wine red. The backpack, his vents on the very back, I think, and there's some vents on the top as well. So there's sort of quite a few bits on the backpack that we do. So there's the 4 vents on the very bottom, the 2 bigger vents, and then the sort of 5 vents at the top. Just base coat all of those in your wine red. Move on to the deep red, which will be Evil Sun Scarlet, and now we're just picking out where we want the brightness to be more intense. So this is our first sort of highlight. So this will be the centre of the servo skull's eye, a little bit of the U symbol, the bottom edges of the heat vents as well. So only cover probably 30 or 40% of those areas, leaving some of the wine red at the tops and the brighter red at the bottom. Once that's dry, I then do a little highlight using the white. So pick out little dots here and there with the white of where you want to be the hottest points. So the very centre of the eye, little dots for any lenses, the bottom parts of the sort of backpack areas, and then we go over those with the fluorescent red, and then once that's dry we use the fluorescent orange as the very final highlight, and it gives a nice heated glowing effect. Okay, we're very close to completion now. The final step is edge highlighting the armour. So I'm using AK Sky Blue. You could use AK Ducat Blue or any of the light blues from Games Workshop. This is quite a bright highlight, so I have to be quite careful. And all I'm doing here is what we usually do with our edge highlighting and battle damage is we do the edge highlighting as normal, we make it thicker in some places, add in some scratches, bullet marks, larger thicker areas where we want that battle damage to be more intense. I generally don't go, I've got a little bit of a shaky hand, so the battle damage helps me sort all of that out. I know I don't have to have too much finesse. So yeah, I don't hide any of this away, so you can just keep watching along of how I do the battle damage, but it is relatively straightforward. It is just a thicker edge highlight and scratch marks, almost 5-star areas where I want to have bullet holes, so it's like the bullet has punched through, because the next stage will be just going over those areas with a matte black colour to look like there's holes and dents and the scratches have depth to them. Obviously this is optional, you could just edge highlight your model, you could do a little bit of dry brushing here to speed it along. Obviously if you were batch painting an army and you have the airbrush, a lot of these steps would be a lot quicker because you could just use gold straight out of the pot instead of doing non-metallic metal. You could do dry brushing, but certainly the Ultramarines, you know, the Ultramarine blues that you can get, but certainly for your characters doing this. But if you've got a nice unit of aggressors, any nice small units, treating them like characters can really enhance your army. once that's done, I use the Army Painters matte black from their little Fanatics range, but a Baden black, any black will do here. And all I do now is fill in those gaps that we created. So I always leave some of that blue showing around the edges, and all we're doing is just colouring in those central points, almost doing a secondary edge highlight, adding in where the armour has been pinged off by bullet fire. You'll notice as well some of that non-metallic silver has been done. There wasn't too much on this model, and all that was done was by using a series of greys. So I used AK Basalt Grey and some AK White. So the areas were base coated in the Basalt Grey, and then much like how we did the flesh, we just transitioned from the dark grey up to the white by just doing little mixes. So it started off as a sort of 70-30 to the dark grey to the white, and then just add a few more drops of white as you go through. There are some other videos where I cover the non-metallic silvers. Yeah, the actual video itself I was taking corrupt, but yeah, there wasn't too much of it on there, so there wasn't much missed, and it was mostly on the servo skull. But as you can see here, just going around filling in those areas with the matte black. And there we have it. For the base, I know a lot of you do your own bases, so I don't really go too much in depth with the bases, but I just base coated mine in a very dark brown, and then did a few washes of sort of medium rust colours and light rust colours, and added a few gamer grass tufts. Nothing overly clever for this. Slightly darker matter tones to really make that blue and red glowing effects stand out. I also added some transfers on the Parchment, some script transfers that you can get from the Mighty Brush. Very easy to apply. And so yeah, that's it. There's Ferren completed. I hope you enjoyed this tutorial. We have quite a few Ultramarines out at the moment, so hopefully that will be enough Ultramarines for a while. We can move on to some other models. So yeah, as always, like, comment and subscribe. It helps me out a lot. Really appreciate you watching and following and subscribing and all that. It's yeah, you can't imagine how appreciated I am and how much it spurs me on to do more. So yeah, as always, happy painting, my fellow painters.